Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Right Guys podcast. It's all about the Second Amendment. And here we go. And now your hosts, Josh Hammerling and Max McGuire.
Welcome back. Another edition of the Right Guys podcast. I'm here with Mr. Producer Josh Hammerling. My name is Max McGuire, and we are joined by a special guest. We will bring him right on. Mr. Stephen Halbrook, Second Amendment author, litigator, PhD, historian, all of the above. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Glad to be on the show. I mean, if it's named The Right Guys, there must be something going for it. Must be something right about it.
Well, we're certainly on that side. We'll be doing it for a while. We've got fun listeners, but we have a lot of listeners who are strong Second Amendment supporters. Max has been a strong Second Amendment supporter since I met him. I have been too. And when I saw the opportunity to get you on, I took it because there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. And we're post-Biden presidency stuff. So we really wanted to pick your mind today.
It's always interesting. It's always interesting getting to talk to, interview, have a conversation with people who had such a pivotal role in the court cases that now just kind of flow off the tongue, right? You debate someone on gun control and you just drop Heller like it's no big deal. But you were there. I believe you were representing the members of Congress who kind of signed on to the case. Is it surreal at all to have participated in such an important case? Obviously, the left is trying to whittle away at it every day. But has the shock kind of wore off that you were able to play any role in that victory?
I don't know about shock, but it's hard to keep track. There's so much going on now. If you go back before Heller, we were involved in trying to enhance the academic literature. That started out in the late 70s, early 80s. And there came a time by the early 90s when the pro-Second Amendment side in the academic literature became the standard model. And that was pretty clear to see why. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It says the people. It doesn't say the militia or the National Guard. Keep and bear, possess something, carry it. Arms, hello. Handguns, rifles, shotguns. And so it was only a matter of time before the case came, as you said, came before the Supreme Court in District of Columbia versus Heller. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Forget that was a 5-4 decision. And a lot of people thought, well, Kennedy is the swing vote. And so what's Kennedy going to say? And I'll never forget it. I was sitting there, as you said, I filed a brief on behalf of majority of members of Congress, an amicus curiae brief, friend of the court brief. And so we're all sitting there, and Justice Kennedy opens his mouth. We're like on the edge of our seats. And the lawyer was Walter Dellinger, representing the District of Columbia. He was a very accomplished lawyer. He had been one of Clinton's solicitor generals. I considered him a friend because I argued other cases against him, particularly Prince versus U.S., which held that the Brady Act could not conscript sheriffs nationwide to do background checks. That was more of a 10th Amendment case. But anyway, Justice Kennedy opens his mouth and he asks Walter, weren't the founders practical people who had to have guns to protect themselves from criminals, from Indians, hostile Indians, and grizzly bears? And everybody on our side was thinking like, yes, that means he agrees it's an individual right. Yeah. I was thinking there were no grizzly bears east of the Mississippi, but that didn't matter.
Those are specifics.
Don't say it.
Yeah. I'm sure Walter's heart dropped, and all the Brady people, their hearts dropped, and sure enough, and then the next kind of funny thing in this Heller episode that you don't know from reading the opinion. We go there on the last day of the Supreme Court's term. We knew they were going to deliver or summarize the opinion in Heller. We didn't know which way it went. And at first, the Chief Justice called upon Justice Stevens. And what happens is that if you author an opinion, you summarize it. And so when he said Justice Stevens, I'm thinking, am I going to have a heart attack or what? Because if it's Stevens,
and just for all of our listeners, it's in reverse order of seniority. So the youngest, the most recent member of the court, if they issue an opinion, would summarize it before the Chief Justice would. So as you start seeing which ones are speaking, you learn that whoever was on the court for less time won't be reading anything that day. So you start doing the math in your head and like, okay, well, how many markings on the page? How many are we going to get today? And which justices do we have left? It can be really nerve-wracking. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, so when they said Justice Stevens, we knew we lost if he was going to summarize the opinion in Heller. But fortunately, he summarized the opinion in some case we didn't give a hoot about. And then when they said Justice Scalia will summarize, and we knew we won, and we were rejoicing, and it was great. And so the decision came out. We thought, whoa, this is going to be a no-brainer for continuing this kind of litigation. The Supreme Court said the kinds of arms that are in common use by law-abiding people for lawful purposes are protected by the Second Amendment. And so what did we do? Within just a matter of days, we filed a case called Heller 2, challenging the District of Columbia's ban on semi-automatic rifles, which they like to call assault weapons, but there's nothing assault about them. And so we thought, oh, the common use standard, not a problem. We're going to win this one easily. And so we got to court. We got to the Court of Appeals, and the majority said, yeah, these rifles that they banned are in common use. But then they made up the intermediate scrutiny test, where judges get to decide is the right worthwhile after all in view of the government interests. So we ended up with a 2-1 opinion in Heller 2, where the D.C. Circuit said, oh, yeah, they're in common use nationwide, but they can be banned anyway because, and they gave a couple of excuses, like the protruding pistol grip is so you can hold it at the hip and shoot many people as quickly as possible. Some stupid fantasy world that the anti-gun people made up. But we did have a dissenting opinion by a judge who I didn't know much about at the time. His name was Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
He wrote a wonderful dissent, and he said that this court is not being true to Heller. The semi-automatic rifles have been around since the turn of the century. They're in common use. We look at text and history. By that he meant we looked at the language of the Second Amendment, and we look at history, like what kinds of restrictions, if any, were allowed at the founding, because that gives information about what the text meant. And there just weren't any bans of this type. Heller had said you can ban carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons. That means the kinds of arms that aren't ordinarily kept by people. Heller said that would include heavy military armament, things like that. So anyway, we got this wonderful dissent, and it was a blueprint for future cases. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of litigation since then. We have a reaffirmation of Heller in the Bruin case. But, you know, it's really strange how after Bruin, more states have passed bans on what the Supreme Court said you can't ban. Since then, they didn't get the memo.
Let me ask you about that, because you talk about Justice Kennedy. I mean, it's not really a secret anymore. It's been put in a bunch of books, a bunch of memoirs, that he needed the Heller decision to say certain things in order for him to get on board. And one of the things that's been widely reported, one of the statements that was widely reported, added to the decision in order to get him on board, was this quote in the decision, quote, "The court's opinion should not be taken to cast doubt on longstanding prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. Miller's holding that the sort of weapons protected are those in common use at the time finds support in the historical tradition of prohibiting the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons, end quote. That, I mean, it seems like every time we get a decision that is good for the Second Amendment, it's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? We have that part in Heller, which every anti-gun court and judge across the country says, dangerous and unusual, should not be construed as casting aside any of these old prohibitions. With Rahimi, you have the court kind of walking back a little bit of Bruin, because the Bruin test we thought was going to be if it's at the founding or at the ratification, then if it's not there, it's gone. Then the Supreme Court says, oh, well, the law is not something that should be trapped in amber. How can we move forward in this if every time we seem to win, there are other forces at play that are sneaking these little things in there? It has to be incredibly frustrating.
Well, the fact is that the judges who want to uphold gun restrictions have misused the holdings in these cases, whether it's Heller, McDonald, Bruin, or Rahimi. I think with Rahimi, for example, you could argue it either way. That was a 8-1 opinion. The Chief Justice made a reasonable argument. Justice Thomas made a reasonable argument, and it depended on the level of generality as to what kind of historical analogs one can resort to. But what Rahimi reaffirmed once again, like as well as did Bruin, is that the kinds of arms that are in common use are protected, that implements that facilitate armed self-defense are protected. So we're talking about, for example, semi-automatic actions, or you can argue silencers. But there's an element of judges, and they're in the states where this is part of the political culture. They want to uphold gun restrictions. And no matter what the Supreme Court says, they're going to continue to do so. And what I think is in our future, and we might know in just a few weeks whether the court's going to take a case on a prohibition on banning semi-automatic rifles and also magazines. And once Bruin came down, I was in the works. I'm going to promote myself here a little bit with America's Rifle, the case for the AR-15. I started litigating that issue in 1989 when the first ban passed. That was California. And we couldn't rely much on the Second Amendment at that time because it had not been established by Heller, which was not until 2008. But we made some progress on issues like vagueness. The antis didn't know exactly how to define what they wanted to ban, and so you cannot have vague laws that impose criminal punishments. And so we had some success in some cases, but once Heller came down, it seemed like a clear rule was established. But courts are going to continue to do this no matter what the Supreme Court says. But there are 2 cases pending. They've been pending in the Supreme Court for several months now. There's the Maryland so-called assault weapon ban case and the Rhode Island so-called large capacity magazine case. And the court, instead of denying cert in those cases, the court has continued to relist them on a weekly basis. I think it's relisted them maybe 14 times or so. And so I think we'll soon find out, is the court going to take one of those cases for the next term, or is Justice Thomas, for example, writing a dissent from denial of cert? I think we'll find out soon. But that's what I wrote this book for, by the way, America's Rifle. I wanted to go through historically how we got where we are, how it came to be that arms are protected, what kinds of arms are protected. And I've tried to set out in the book basically a history to guide the court and for interested people to read. I mean, it's a phenomenal thing about the Second Amendment is that lay people love to read about it, even though they're not trained lawyers. Your average gun owner has a stake. Those people over there want to incarcerate you for your gun and for exercise of your constitutional rights. So I think that explains why the American public, the gun owning public, they're avid readers about Second Amendment and laws and cases on the Second Amendment. So we'll soon find out what the court does. But I think either it'll take those cases and do the right thing, or it'll just deny certain those cases and just wait for another day, perhaps, to kick the can down the road. But we'll see.
I have one more question about the lawyers, and then Josh, I'll throw it over to you because I know you're waiting for a question. I want to ask you. It's a silly question, but it's something that the other side is saying with a straight face. Here's some the examples in the past that they're using to justify modern gun control laws. They're saying that it's okay to ban an AR-15 because in New York City in the 1700s, there was a fire code that said you couldn't have kegs of gunpowder on a second story or something like that. They're saying it's okay for us to disarm for life white collar felons because at the time of the founding, it was a crime for Native Americans to have guns, or for Black people to have guns, or at some points in our history before the founding, for Catholics to have guns in England. How is it that these arguments are getting any daylight whatsoever? It would seem that the minute you have to point to, oh, we can do this because back in the day we disarmed all of the Black people, or we disarmed all the Catholics, or we disarmed all the Native Americans, right? it would seem that's just a completely unacceptable argument. And yet every court is citing these things. Why is that? Are they just being fed bad information by the anti-gun side, or do they genuinely think that it's okay to build up their gun control with a foundation of flagrantly unconstitutional past behaviors?
Well, so in the Bruin case, the court invalidated New York state law, which basically denied the right to carry arms in public. You could get a pistol permit if you were a billionaire or a celebrity, or you paid bribes to the New York City licensing division. Yeah. There was a big case about that where a bunch of people went to prison for that. So what the court said is that the people means the people, bear means bear, and so you can carry. We only look at two things to determine validity of a law or a restriction. One, is it within the text of the Second Amendment? Is the activity protected by the wording keep and bear arms? And two, if that's the case, then the burden shifts to the government to justify its restriction by historical analogs, laws that were near the founding, that had restrictions that people would agree with. A really obvious example would be you can't point a gun to another person to induce fear. It's called brandishing. That had to, in fact, the affray was carrying a dangerous and an unusual weapon in a manner that terrified the public, things like that. And so these are analogs, and we have historical analogs for restrictions that are valid. But what's happening is that the antis are trying to reach for the sky to find anything and everything in history they can cite to say, oh, this was a restriction, and therefore we can do this totally irrelevant restriction. And to say that, oh, slaves were disarmed, or that Catholics at certain times were disarmed, I mean, that's a pretty low blow to the Constitution to make arguments like that, but they're being made. They're being accepted by some judges and none others. For example, there are some courts who have questioned the idea that any kind of felon can be disarmed for life. And so there's a case arising out of the Third Circuit about a Pennsylvania man who 20 years ago had a welfare fraud conviction. And the court has said that you can't disarm him for that. It doesn't show that he's a violent person. And so the courts are split on that subject. You have some courts saying you can disarm them no matter what. And another court saying, well, for one thing, anything and everything today is a felony. And so you have to just restrict it to violent felons. And it allows the state to manipulate who
Anything
can
can be a felony.
exercise Second Amendment rights or not.
Anything can be a felony.
Right.
If anything can be a felony, then there is no Second Amendment right.
There's it's an ironic kind of funny book, but it's true about, I forgot the exact title, but how you can commit a federal felony every day. It's a guidebook, basically. So, so the court's going to have to unravel that. And I think we're making progress, no matter how much some of these lower courts resist. And by the way, not every court of appeals is making the wrong decisions. All of them that are making the wrong decisions are from states that the political culture is anti-gun. You will not find the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals making a wrong decision about so-called assault weapons, because Texas would never ban assault weapons, so-called. And so you have some courts will never have an opportunity to rule on these issues because they're encompassed in states where they don't pass stupid things like this.
You just brought it up. You said something about assault weapons, and I just want to ask you, what is an assault weapon? Like, what's the definition of that, and why has it been used so much? Because I just see rifles when I look at a gun, but the state of Colorado sees anything with the magazine as an assault weapon and is writing these laws based on assault weapons. So what is an assault weapon? That's my first question.
It's a implement used in an assault. Years ago, I did a word search in Westlaw that has all the cases decided in U.S. history, basically, for assault weapon. All the older cases, they use the word like this: the prisoner used his broom as an assault weapon against the guard. In other words, an assault weapon is something that doesn't have to be a weapon inherently, but it's used as a weapon in an assault. And so the term was invented by anti-gun zealots to confuse people. You had the term assault rifle, Sturmgewehr in German, introduced in World War II for the Germans, what became known as a German assault rifle. And then the term came to be used for the AK-47, the M16, and other weapons that use an intermediate cartridge and have selective fire, so you can fire either semi-automatic or full automatic. And so that's the correct use of the term. But because the Colt AR-15 Sporter, for example, when it was introduced in the 60s, had the profile of the M16, one of the anti-gun people wrote that the public is confused between machine guns and semi-automatics, and we can latch onto that term assault weapon and use it for propaganda purposes, basically. Josh Horowitz, that was the guy's name. I don't know what the current name of their outfit is. They change the name sometimes, but that's how that got started. So then, so what happens? California passed the first ban. It was a long list of different kinds of rifles, mostly a sprinkling of pistols and shotguns, but mostly rifles. All the rifles that are accurate and used for sporting purposes, and they're very rarely used in crime. But you have one spectacular crime in the case of California that started this. There was Patrick Purdy was a loser criminal who should have been incarcerated, and he shot up a schoolyard and killed some kids. And that's why that law was passed, even though rifles are used less in crime than handguns, and up until recently, less. Oh yeah, knives and hands. I mean, blunt instruments of various kinds. So there you have it. You know, we had, I think, 5 states with so-called assault weapon bans at the time Bruin was decided. And about a week after the decision came down, the governor of Delaware signs a new ban, despite what the court had just said in Bruin. Wow. And then it spread to Illinois and now Colorado, unfortunately.
I'd like to ask, too, I saw a shift from the word assault rifle to weapons of war.
No, please.
Is that still, have you still seen, like, that seems to be the new propaganda mantra? Because now that assault weapons really don't quite exist in their mind, they try to base laws on that, and they keep throwing laws out based on it. Now they're switching to this weapons of war. And I mean, is that going to rise to the level of being able to ban a weapon because it was used in warfare? Because as long as I can remember, they used flintlock rifles as a weapon of war in order to win the revolution. So is that just continued propaganda, or is there a plan behind that?
There's the 1911 pistol, that's America's pistol.
Mm-hmm.
So weapons of war, today that refers to heavy weaponry like artillery. According to Heller, it refers to weapons like the M16, which is full auto. But so what's happened? This is incredible what some of these courts have done. The Fourth Circuit in the Maryland case and the Seventh Circuit in the Illinois case. Weapons of war. Well, a semi-automatic rifle is a weapon of war. And by the way, no army or armed force worldwide uses semi-automatic rifles as a service weapon, a standard service weapon. And then what else do we hear? Well, semi-automatic single shots, those are more dangerous than full automatic. Look, I'm not kidding. Not only are lawyers making these arguments, but courts are saying this. Semi-automatic rifles are more dangerous than machine guns. I mean, now we've crossed the line from bizarre to ultra bizarre. Mm-hmm. And we also have the mantra, this puny little 223 cartridge, 5.56 millimeter, is the most dangerous thing you could possibly shoot. And it blows a person in half. I mean, this is a varmint cartridge originally. It's underpowered.
Shooting groundhogs.
Yeah, you want to ban my 30-06? Why don't you do that instead? I mean, that's a lot more powerful. So
don't give them ideas.
Look, these judges who want to uphold these laws, they're going to say anything until the Supreme Court reins them in.
That's really, really interesting. The other thing is there's this other statement Colorado loves right now. It's called high capacity magazine. I don't know what a high capacity magazine is. I know what a standard magazine, and that's the one that holds enough bullets to get the job done. Because I teach self-defense with a pistol, and a lot of attackers don't stop even after 7 rounds. So how do we start fighting that battle here in Colorado, saying there's no such thing as a high capacity magazine? They're just magazines.
Right. What we've seen recently is, I think this might have come out of the Ninth Circuit in the Duncan case. California banned mere possession of magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. Mm-hmm. And the court concedes that, well, the magazine, if it holds no more than 10, is constitutionally protected. But if it holds more, it's not an essential part of a firearm because you don't need that many. And more than 10 is never required for actual self-defense, and, on and on and on. They even say, well, it's like the manufacturers are so mean because they make these guns with these magazines that hold more than 10. They make the consumers buy those. And so, if the consumers only wanted like 6 rounds in a magazine, that's what they would demand. That's what the manufacturers would make. Mm-hmm. So don't give me this crap about, the manufacturers are making us do this. Yeah. I mean, what's going on? I mean, some of these courts will say about anything. And
I know, it always makes me laugh when I read they're just completely wrong when it comes to ballistics, when it comes to like how fast a bullet moves, how quickly a round can be fired. And then you see some of these protest materials. I'm sure you've seen this before, but I'll go ahead and show it. It's been making the rounds online for a while, but this was a protest of a person holding up this sign saying, this is the size of a hold made by an AR-15. Tell me why you need that. And that's like 50 cal territory, right? Where we're in like exit wound, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually made some pretty funny memes that people have responded. Like this hole was caused by a single AR-15 round. It's a giant sinkhole. And then there's this one, an asteroid impact crater was caused by a single AR-15 round.
Right.
Why is it that the average person can see that and just going to the range once can say, well, that's BS. I've shot paper before. I know that that's not what it looks like. Why is it that the layperson has such a basic bullshit detector, right? Like we can tell that that's not real. why is it that the other side falls for it and that these courts keep falling for it? Because it seems something that's so easily refuted. When I saw one, it was like it could shoot like 100 rounds a second. And I was like,
Right.
what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Like, how does this person have control over our life if they can't even do the simplest form of research before putting pen to paper and putting that down? Like, how do they get fooled by this?
I mean, it's a combination of ignorance on the part of many, and I think intentional deceivement. I think, for example, if you have, like in the Fourth Circuit decision upholding the Maryland ban, they're saying, well, these AR-15s shoot these ultra powerful cartridges. Of course, an AR-15 can shoot a 22 rimfire. It can shoot
50 Beowulf,
7.65 Creedmoor. I mean, it's all kinds of cartridges. But then they compare that with a 9mm pistol. And they say, oh, well, a typical pistol shoots a 9mm and it's not as powerful and it doesn't go through as many walls and things like that. But I mean, any judge who writes that knows good and well he's comparing a rifle to a pistol, and that's not a valid comparison. Rifles are going to shoot further, by and large, than a handgun. So, without impinging on anybody's integrity, we can say there's a lot of ignorance built into these decisions, these arguments and decisions. And I think as far as your satire posters, I think those people know they're just exaggerating.
Oh yeah, no, those are just jokes. Those are just jokes.
Yeah.
The poster was real, but
Yeah.
saying that the like a giant asteroid crater was, they're just making fun of it.
Yep.
No, it's just wild. What do you got, Josh?
Oh, well, I was going to ask, have you ever heard of any one of your rights that requires training to use? Meaning, so in Colorado, they wanted me to have anybody that buys a semi-automatic weapon to have a minimum of 12 hours of training, a firearms course eligibility card, which is something that they're adding, which I've never heard of. And then I have to go through a sheriff vetting and background checks. So what other right do I have that requires me to go and beg the sheriff to use, like the First Amendment?
Can I take a stab at it? Can I take a stab of it? If I was a liberal judge, this is what I would say. Well, I would look at the analog. Back in the day, Jim Crow South, we had a really fantastic law that required Black people to name every single county judge, first, middle, and last name, and take a literacy test in order to vote. That would be the analog that me, a liberal judge, would point to. I mean, that seems like what we're going towards, right?
Yeah, not a bad example. And let me offer my condolences. I mean, Colorado used to be such a wonderful state.
Oh, I know.
It was very pro-gun. I did some litigation there in Denver. They passed the first so-called assault weapon ban. We got it invalidated in a trial at the local level, and then the Court of Appeals reversed on us. Basically said it's a constitutional right under the Colorado Constitution, but this constitutional right, just the restriction only needs a rational basis to uphold it, which it's like it's not a constitutional right. But finally, your legislature came around to making something like that, or even worse than what Denver initially enacted, made it statewide. This 14-hour training, that's harassment. Nobody needs that. I mean, the few states that require training for a pistol permit, it's not going to be anything like that. And I don't know what the constitutional validity of any kind of training requirement would be for any exercise of any constitutional right. You can make the same argument about free speech. Well, if you don't have some education or re-education and some training requirements by people who know the truth, you might have people making statements that are not true, or their facts might disagree with my facts, or whatever, to use, I think, an old Biden saying.
Yeah.
So, we don't want people giving the wrong idea. We can't have people enunciating ideas from Mein Kampf or the Communist Manifesto or the Koran or the Bible, or, you choose what you don't like. This is totally inconsistent with the idea of a constitutional right. And, we have a Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure. Do we have to have training so we can exercise that right, or they can come into your house if you haven't had your training or permission from the sheriff not to have an intrusion? I mean, if you look at a constitutional right, its very nature, it's not going to require government approval of this type. So we'll see where this goes. This just keeps getting more outlandish in terms of the restrictions. Once Bruin came down and said, you can't just ban guns everywhere. The whole Manhattan is not a sensitive place. So what happens? The state of New York bans guns in as many places as humanly possible. And so you've got this revolt against the Supreme Court's rulings. And again, it's not going to calm down until we have more precedents from the Supreme Court. And, the more the merrier. We don't have many yet, but we need to rein in these lower courts.
It reminds me of a Chicago law that got challenged. I believe it was overturned. They said, yeah, sure, you can have gun stores, but you can't have gun stores within X number of feet of a school, a hospital, a rec center, a gymnasium. And when all was said and done, you plot that all on the map, and there's pretty much nowhere you can have a gun store.
The District of Columbia. District of Columbia had such a law, and so there couldn't be any place where a gun store could operate. But DC knew that they were going to be called on the carpet for that, and so they allowed the opening of an FFL in the police station.
Yeah,
that's where you had to go to have your handguns transferred to you, or rifles or shotguns. And by the way, using Chicago as an example, they also said that you had to have certain training before you can get a handgun license, but then they banned all shooting ranges in Chicago and in Cook County too, I think. And so that was held unconstitutional by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. And, that it's like the bait and switch. Yeah, you can have a pistol permit, but you have to have training, but you can't have training. So,
and there's no trainers.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something, because it was in the news. The Trump DOJ is not retasking, but they're tasking the Civil Rights Office with going after violations of the Second Amendment, which the left is screaming, because in their mind, the DOJ is supposed to be kicking in doors to take guns, not defending people's rights to own them. It's got me thinking, and I'm sure it's got you thinking, of a lot of low-hanging fruit that this office could use. I wanted to ask you whether it would have any merit to go after these reciprocity agreements for carry reciprocity state by state, or the states that won't allow any other state's permit to be listed, or will allow some but not others. It seems like that would be ripe for a 14th Amendment challenge of unequal protection under the law, that some states, if you're a resident of one state, you can take the same exact class as another state and you're allowed to carry, but that other state isn't because they're red, right? It seems like that would be a ripe case to file.
Well, an extreme example of that is illustrated by the state of New York. Only a resident can get a pistol permit.
Yeah.
Really?
And they do not recognize any permits from any other state. So there's been litigation on that. Years ago, it probably was before Heller, their Court of Appeals said that that's not a problem. You got a problem with that? No. But now it's been litigated again, and either in the Second Circuit or maybe somewhere else, I think the court said you've got to at least allow people from other states to apply for permits in your state if you won't have reciprocity. But there's so many issues like that, Max, where most states recognize permits from other states. In fact, the majority of states now don't even require a permit to carry concealed. Called constitutional carry. But it's the usual suspect states that want to make life miserable for everybody. New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, California, Go down the list. And so once again, there must be 50 different issues that courts could rule on, the Supreme Court could rule on. When you start getting into the weeds here, there's so many restrictions without a real basis, whether it's equal protection or Second Amendment or some other part of the Bill of Rights.
The other one that has got me thinking a lot lately is, just as a disclaimer, me and Josh, we both support law enforcement. We have cop friends. They have a hard job and they need our support. I still won't talk to a cop if they're investigating me. I'm going to remain silent, but we support them in doing their jobs. I've never understood, and post Bruin, I still don't understand how we can have a right to keep and bear arms, but the only people in America who can carry in all 50 states are active or retired law enforcement under LEOSA.
Right.
That if the Second Amendment exists to protect us from government, why are the only people who can exercise that right the agents of government? Not saying that they're bad, right? But it's just it seems illogical. And I was wondering, would there be any 14th Amendment challenge to that? The idea that a retired law enforcement officer would have more rights and privileges and immunities than me, even if I could pass the same test.
Well, those kinds of exceptions or special privileges, it's not limited to LEOSA. And LEOSA wasn't passed as part of any kind of argument for special Second Amendment rights by police officers. It was just passed as, why don't we just be nicer to police officers, and they have a hard job, so sometimes they have to travel interstate. There's people who don't like them because they arrested them before, things like that. But there's other laws of that same type. If we look at the magazine bans, like in California, you have an exemption for law enforcement officers, or the special handgun roster that California had, which has now been partially invalidated. Supposedly for consumers bought the kind of handguns that were not on the roster, it was unsafe, but cops could buy them. Yeah. Suddenly it became safe. And so that was litigated.
There's no defensive purpose for it. Then the law enforcement union is saying we need these because these are the best defensive weapons.
So that was litigated in the Ninth Circuit, which is one of the worst anti-Second Amendment courts nationwide. And Judge Reinhardt, who was probably has the record Mr. Anti-Second Amendment judge, wrote in his opinion that, okay, so if ordinary citizens cannot have these magazines, and there's an exemption for law enforcement officers, I'm going to rule that law enforcement officers can't have them either. And so what he did was to criminalize law enforcement officer possession or purchase of these magazines, which the legislature had never passed. The correct answer would have been to say, this is an equal protection violation. And if they have the right to have these magazines, if they're retired, they have no special need for them that other people don't have, then this law is invalid for everybody. That's the correct way to view that situation. But it's the same with some of the bans on so-called assault weapons, that you have exemptions for special people like cops and I think in Illinois, service people. You have some kind of strange exceptions there, but it boils down to Second Amendment says the right of the people.
I'll not be infringed, yeah. Hey, if I could real quick, Colorado is also about to, we've had a 15-round magazine limit ban, but under the new law, by August 6th of next year, all magazines must be permanently affixed to the firearm, whether it be handgun or rifle. I do not know how any of my guns will operate if they do not have a magazine that I can take out and reload. I would have to top load every handgun I've got.
Well, have you seen what California, every time California comes up with a workaround, they ban it. So they had the bullet buttons, and then they banned those. They had stripper clips. They basically feed through the side. They're banning those. they were feeding them, they were disassembling it, feeding it through the top, banning that. No, they'll never be happy until you have no magazine.
There's always workarounds because of they're only banning things in a superficial way. Like California, they ban a rifle if it has a pistol grip that you would hold like a pistol with the thumb basically going around and maybe touching the forefinger. And so that gets banned. And so, but if you can't wrap your thumb around, then it's not an assault weapon. So they came out with, I call it the thin device, where your thumb has to be sticking up like you're hitchhiking. So you can't hold it quite as well. But then that becomes legal because you no longer have the feature of the protruding pistol grip. And by the same token, in California on the magazine bans, they've come out with different ways to load quickly and things like that. I don't know if it's workable to find a workaround with the Colorado language that Josh, that you mentioned, because I don't think that's going to happen. You've got millions of semi-auto rifles that and pistols with detachable magazines. I don't think you're going to have compliance with that, and I don't know any technical easy fix for that.
They just want to ban it, and that's what the legislature here has done. They even got rid of ghost guns, like being able to manufacture my own gun is also on that list, and that will, like, they make it sound like it's really evil, and I'm making my own guns. People have been making their own guns since the American Revolution and before. Right. So, I mean, that needs to be addressed. There's nobody here fighting for us, though. I mean, the only thing that's left is to be out in the streets, standing in front of the Capitol with signs saying, "Hell no, we won't go." At this point, everything criminalizes me here. You know,
I think in the rural parts of your state, I don't think there's much compliance with any of this stuff.
Heck, I don't think in the cities there's much compliance, but they can't wait to start throwing us in jail or start making examples of us. And that's what I'm worried about, because they'll be able to lawfare me and anybody else to death.
Right.
There's no way anybody can afford to fight these battles. So it makes me really nervous. And the other thing is they want to start working on the accessories to a gun. I did not know what makes accessories to a gun make it illegal, but that's the next thing they're going after. Like the double stage triggers, the kind of stock you can have on a gun, the kind of grip you can put on there. I mean, they're going California, and they're multiplying it by 1,000 here in Colorado, just hoping it sticks. Yeah. Right? Stuck in litigation for the next 20 years.
But when you see what some of the courts are saying, it's incredible. Which one was it that said, well, arms are protected but non-accessories? And if you go back to the founding, they gave a list of accessories, and that included your pouch where you carried ammunition, your flints. Okay, your flints. That's an accessory. You can't fire a flintlock without a flint in it. And so these people who write this stuff, they don't know what they're talking about, or they're willing to say about anything just to uphold these laws. But
you can have a musket, but you can't have a ramrod.
And so if you want to talk about what if only the things that make the gun go bang are protected, you could ban sights. You could ban a shoulder stock. You could ban the safety device if it's a manual safety.
You're right.
You could ban about everything. In fact, you could reduce it to, okay, you can have a piece of plumbing pipe and a 410 shotgun, a hammer, and something to hit the primer, and you're protected. That's all the Second Amendment guarantees you. I mean, they're going against modern technology. They're going against what the people decide. Heller made clear that the people decide what is constitutionally protected, not the government. That's why guns that are commonly possessed by law-abiding people for lawful purposes are protected. And that includes ordinary handguns and rifles and shotguns.
It's crazy.
Yeah. We're here with Stephen Halbrook, the author of America's Rifle, The Case for the AR-15, which you can find on Amazon and booksellers everywhere. Almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you, I'm sure you saw it, the case about nationwide injunctions at the Supreme Court. They were dealing with birthright citizenship, which I think is a very fair question on whether the language designed to give freed slave citizenship, retroactive citizenship, should apply to anyone born in the United States other than diplomats. But Justice Sotomayor had a hypothetical that she raised to try and defend the nationwide injunction. She said, quote, "So when a new president orders that because there's so much gun violence going on in the country, and he comes in and he says, I have the right to take away the guns from everyone, then and he sends out the military to seize everyone's guns. And we, the courts, have to sit back and wait until every named plaintiff gets, or every plaintiff whose gun is taken comes into court." It's a ridiculous argument, but you talk about we the people, and obviously you're a litigator, so you are going to correctly say that the path to fix these problems is through litigation. I have to think that Justice Sotomayor would understand that if we were to get to that point where the government is sending the military to kick down people's doors and take away their guns, that the relief would not come from an injunction.
Right.
The relief would likely come from popular resistance, armed resistance to that kind of tyranny. Do you think that she can't wrap her head around that? Or is she viewing that as a legitimate government behavior that can be weighed in courts?
So the remedy would not be Federal Rule of Civil Procedure. I'm going to make the number up 56. The remedy would be what happened on April 19th, 1775 at Lexington and Concord. If that's really happening, popular resistance would be justified. That's the religion, I'll put it that way, of the Declaration of Independence. That's the way America was founded. And so I think what Justice Sotomayor was trying to conjecture was a little far afield, and I don't know if she'll put that in an opinion. That was an oral argument, but it was a pretty ridiculous thing to say. And I don't remember what the answer was to that. But in fact, probably a lawyer would not want to say Lexington and Concord is the answer. Wouldn't want to say that in court, but that would be the answer.
Yeah. But she brought it up 3 times. Yeah. It was almost like she went into court saying, I got a hypothetical. I'm going to show it. And she kept bringing it forward because it wasn't hitting right. I think that she and people who think like her can actually wrap their heads around the government kicking in people's doors with the military, taking their guns away, and it coming down to a 5-4 decision on whether that's okay. Like, I think she can imagine that world. Like, we look at that world and say, okay, the proverbial shit has hit the fan. Everyone load up. It's time to go do patriot things, right? I mean, that's what we can. We don't want to do it. I have 2 kids at home. I would hate that, right?
Yeah.
But we understand that if you reach that point of no return, the event horizon of this gun control black hole, then at some point it gets to that. And as terrifying as that is, I'm even more terrified by how casually she 3 times during oral arguments presented that as if it's business as usual, and as if it's something that could even hypothetically be upheld.
You know what she didn't understand? Our law enforcement in this country, our average cop, our military people, they would never do that. And if your world allows you to imagine that happening, then you don't have the basic knowledge about what America is. And most cops are pro-gun. Most military people, I suspect, are. Although I've never seen surveys with military people. I've seen surveys with cops. And, if she can imagine that world, she's not imagining America. That's not going to happen here. We wouldn't just comply with something like that and spend years of litigation waiting for the case to be resolved. And then if the country had gone that corrupt, it'd be resolved adversely to the gun owners, and we'd live in a different world. So that was bad hypothetical.
It reminds me of Biden saying, "You want AR-15? We have F-16s," saying that the government's just going to bomb you, right? And I live in San Antonio, which is Air Force City. We have 2 Air Force bases. I have Air Force pilots who live in my neighborhood. Like, it's crazy to like presume that an Air Force pilot would bomb their neighbor, right? But that's the world that they live in.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Josh, give you a last word, because I know.
Well,
I just
here,
cut you
yeah,
off.
I do want to give one more question. So you have written about the evolution of firearms over time since the founding of the country, since well before that. The AR-15 represented an evolution in arms. And as we face a world of robotics, AI, and self-driving vehicles, as those weapons begin to evolve, is there going to be an argument saying that you've only been allowed to have firearms to protect yourself? And I think that's why it was so important to use the word arms, because what is those arms going to look like when I have to protect myself against 10,000 drones?
Yeah.
Right? Am I going to be allowed to do that at home? I mean, there might be a time when that happens. So how do you see that shaking out?
It's hard to say, but if you look at human development and technological development, humans are tool makers. Many animals are born with their own weapons and they can't be detached. But we have the opposing movement with the thumb, and so we make tools. And it's come a long way. But if you want to just go back to medieval times, you've got the English and their longbow. That was a very powerful weapon. That you could call that the assault weapon of the time. And you could shoot them really fast, and that's why the English beat the French in some of the really famous battles in those days. The firearm comes on the scene, but our founders had the forethought to use the term arms. They weren't talking only about firearms. And when they wrote those words, there were swords and spears and bows and arrows and daggers and all kinds of arms. And I don't know where this is going to be headed. We're seeing in the Ukraine the use of some of these technologies that have never been used in war before. And where's that headed? And you also have a combination when that war started of giving out service weapons to the population at large. And you had the stoppage. You had Russian generals shot by snipers, and so you still have great value with marksmanship. In Finland, you've got more shooting ranges going into operation than ever before because they're afraid of the Russians. And so I think I don't know if anybody. I don't think anybody born today will see the demise of firearms as a technological aspect of our society. I think firearms are going to be around for who knows how long. But yeah, what else is going to be encompassed by arms? And if you use the common use test, new things come available and people use them. And these people using them, they use them for self-defense and other lawful purposes. That makes them constitutionally protected. And it would be, I think, unconstitutional just to ban new weapons that come out under the guise, well, they're not in common use yet. So, there's a lot of legal doctrines that are going to have to be for the future. But for now, we've got the right, and majority of people in this country support the Second Amendment, and we'll see where this heads. But we're going to keep fighting.
Well, that's kind of the left's goal, is to borrow the Supreme Court's terminology, to encase the Second Amendment in amber and say you can't have any technology that's invented after 1899 or whatever date they want to use. I mean, right now there are technologies available. They have made railguns handheld. Yeah. So electromagnetically propulsed steel rods, they have handheld versions of them, and they are not covered by any of the legal definition of firearm because there's no propellant, right? It's just magnetically moving something at very high speeds. It's going to be a little bit scary, but innovation is scary. I'm more worried about the technologies that the government has that we won't have, because if we think that the government, I mean, they have technologies where they can put simplifying it, satellite dishes on the back of a Humvee and boil your blood with microwaves. Like,
right.
We've already lost the arms race against the government, and we'll never win it. But it gets very scary when you see them, politicians, anti-gun politicians, declaring that something is all of a sudden too dangerous for us.
But I'll just add, as it stands now, we still have the right. We have, I think, half the people in this country have guns in their houses. You're not going to have a tyranny when you have a situation like that. If they come to take you away, they come to take too many people away. It's not going to happen. Not to mention that, like I said before, most cops, most service people, they're not going to do this anyway. They're not going to support tyranny. I think we've got such a good tradition of liberty in our country that no matter how bad some of these laws get, that they're not going to be supported. And by the way, we have massive disobedience to these laws. You know how many people in California or New York register their so-called assault weapons? You know, like maybe it's 10%. Nobody really knows a number. If they want to have registration, that's the next step is confiscation, and that's happened in other societies.
Yeah, that'll be we'll talk about that the next time we have you on, because I really enjoyed this, man. Great conversations. Thank you so much for the insights.
Stephen, where can people find your writings? Where can people buy your books?
Look at my website, stephenhalbrook.com. I've got about 13 different books and different aspects of the Second Amendment. Also, a book called Gun Control in Nazi-Occupied France, another book called Gun Control in the Third Reich, Disarming the Jews and Enemies of the State. And those books demonstrate how registration can indeed lead to tyranny and confiscation. I've got other books on the Second Amendment, and today I'll show this book one more time, and you've got it up there. America's Rifle. I think this issue is headed for the Supreme Court, and I look forward to it.
There you have it.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you coming on, Stephen. Thank you so much. And we will definitely keep an eye out for those developments to have you back on when the Supreme Court issues a ruling.
Max and Josh, thank you for having me. Great to be on the right side.
I love it. I appreciate it. Thanks again. We'll chat soon.
Okay, guys. Take care.
Right, you too.
Bye.
Well, that's it for this edition. If you like the podcast, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, like, comment, share. Available on YouTube and Rumble. We're also available everywhere you can get audio podcasts. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Podbean, Audible, all great places. Subscribe and it'll auto download every time we have a new episode. That's it for this edition. My name is Max McGuire.
I'm Josh Ammerling.
The fight to take back our country is not over yet, but the only way we win is if we all stand up and fight together. See you next time.